Gemara. Today's daf is daf Yud. We are going through our Mishnah as to work out exactly what each carbon musaf is atoning for, is being mechaper for, and so we now are discussing. We're going through the different opinions. We are up to daf Yud Amid Aleph, and up to now Rav Meir's opinion. Rav Meir is of the view that all the Karbanos Musafin from Rosh Chodesh and Yom Tov and the Seir Hanase Bechutz, the goat that was made outside on Mizbeach HaChitzon, the Karb Musaf Yom Kippur, they all are basically covering the same three kinds of tumas. And what are they? That tumah, which there was no knowledge prior, and then you entered the base of Mikdash, you ate Kodesh, and then afterwards you found out that you became Tameh, which is the Seir Hanase Bechutz. He holds that the other two Musaf in Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh also deal with that. The one that Rosh Chodesh does, which is a Toyer who ate from Tameh, all the other ones take care of that. And the one that Yom Tov does, no Yidiyah B'tchil, no Yidiyah B'seif, they all take care of that. So he has all the Musafim deal with the same things. And we're going to try to work out where do you know that from. So the Gemara is working his way through the entire Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Rab Meir in Kappa of Shabbat, Omer Rab Chama Bar Rab Chanina, my time with Rab Meir, because everyone else learns that each one is in isolation, each one does their own thing. How come he learns that they all cover each other? Omakra, because the Torah could have said Seir, and instead every single Rosh Chodesh and the Yom Tovim, and it says Useir, beginning of a pasuk, it says and the goat. Because we beginning the pasuk with the word and, that means he's connecting it to the past. He could have said Seir. Instead, it says Useir, which means Hukshu Kol Haseirim Zelazeh. We are comparing all the Kar Musafim, which is a goat, a male goat, and they are all covering the same kinds of tumas. Vav Moisiv Al Inyadishim. Now, what? That the Vav adds and connects to the past. Says the Gemara Kasalka Data, so we were of the opinion Kol Chad V'Chad Mechavre Gomer. We were of the opinion that each one learns from the one before. So, for example, you have Rosh Chodesh, and then it talks about Pesach, then it talks about Shavuos, then it talks about Rosh Hashanah, then it talks about Yom Kippur, then it talks about Sukkot. So, I would have thought that each one is you learn from the one before. So, for example, Pesach you learn from Rosh Chodesh, that just whatever Rosh Chodesh covers, Pesach covers as well. That what? That Pesach will the Musaf of Yom Tov will cover a Torah that ate from Talmud Kachim, and in fact, Meir agrees with Rab Shimon that Rosh Chodesh it covers that case. Meir holds like Rab Shimon that covers a Torah that ate from Kodesh, and then it's the same thing. And then the Rosh Chodesh you learn from Pesach, and then you have the next one after that is let's say Rosh Hashanah Kippur, then Sukkot, and Sukkot you learn from Yom Kippur. Sukkot you learn from Yom Kippur. I want that another Yom Tov covers what Yom Kippur covers, which is no Yidiyah in the beginning, but Yidiyah at the end. And however, if there is a Yidiyah and they say that's Yom Kippur to Sukkot, and then you learn the other way around as well. So this one they all learn from each other. And how can you all learn from each other? Because Kasal Kadata, right now we thought, Kol Chad V'Chad Mechavre Gomer. Each one learns from the one before. That even though the one before itself, how do you know that it does certain things? How do you know that Yom Tov does certain things? Is because you learn from the one before. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you are learning from the one before. You can now teach for the next one. Because Amar Rabbi Yechon said, Kol HaTorah Kula L'Meidin Lamad Melamed Chutz Mekachim. So here's a question. I don't understand. Since you are learning from Hekeshim, you're comparing one with another. We have a general rule. If you learn B from A, then B can teach C. Even if you learn B from A through a Hekesh, you're comparing one with another, because they're written next to each other, it can teach regarding C as well. But if it's Kachim, and B itself is not clearly written in the Torah halacha, you're learning B from A through a hekesh or an equation, then B cannot teach C. So l'chayr over here, you're learning one Yom Tov for the other Yom Tov, but you're learning, let's say, Sukkot from Pesach, or let's say Sukkot you learn from Yom Kippur, and then you want Sukkot to come and teach you regarding Pesach. L'chayr, the Sukkot itself, the fact that it can be mechaper on someone who had no yidiyah in the beginning, yidiyah at the end, is only you're learning a hekesh from Yom Kippur. So how can then Sukkot come along and teach you regarding Pesach? How can you do that? Something you learn from a hekesh cannot teach you regarding other things. We already had before. Kula made in lamed melamed, that you can learn something you learn out and teach you, something else. Chutz mikachim she'elu mein lamed melamed. So about a holy kasha, that doesn't bother me. You learned wrong. You thought that be learning one from the one before that, and the one before that you learned from the one before that, and therefore that's how you're learning. You're asking me a question. No, kulu mikama gemidi. It's simple as that. That they all learn from all the Yom Tovim, learn from Rosh Chodesh and Kippur, learn from Rosh Chodesh. That just like Rosh Chodesh covers a tar, that eight Talmudic Kachim, so too all the Yom Tovim can do that. So they're learning directly from the source. They all learn directly from the Yom Kippur and Rosh Chodesh learn directly from Yom Tov. That there was no Yidiyah in the beginning, no Yidiyah at the end. It's Mechaper, and they all learn directly from Yom Kippur. So because there's no middle, they're all going directly to the source. That's how come. So you're okay. Teinach, this makes sense. Called the Kosabe Useir, wherever it says U, and so we learn from the ones before. Okay, or you'll go directly to the source. No, it says and by certain Yom Tov, me go back to Rosh Chodesh and go back to Yom Kippur. But at said as Yom Kippurim, that two Yom Tovim, which doesn't say the word and. On Shavuos it doesn't say and by Yom Kippur it doesn't say and. So those two, how do you learn out that those two carbon Muslims can do other things besides what they can do themselves directly? The Lekosabes even on how do you know? Ellen Rabbi Yena says different thing altogether. So basically, the Gemara repudiates what Rav Chama said. And even though yesterday we used Rav Chama for Rav Shimon, so the Rishonim say, even though we said Rav Chama, the Gemara there didn't want to go into the whole subject, so we just brought the beginning of the subject of Chama. But at the end, we repudiate Rav Chama and we bring something else. Ella Rabbi Yena says, O Makra, it says in Pasuk, Eila Sasa Hashem b'moyadechem. It says in Pasuk, Eila Sasa Hashem. This is what you should do Hashem b'moyadechem. It says here b'moyadechem. It says Yom Tovim in plural. He said this is what you do for Hashem in plural. Why does it say moyadechem in plural? To teach you that all hukshu kol that all Yom Tovim are equal to each other. So in other words, all Yom Tovim cover the same thing. Kippur and Yom Tovim, so on and so forth. But the question is, since when is Rosh Chodesh Yom Tov? All we know from there is that Yom Tovim and Yom Kippur, they all cover each other. But Rosh Chodesh is not a Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, but Rosh Chodesh Lav Moirud. Rosh Chodesh is not a Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, Ibra, yes, Rosh Chodesh Nami Ikra Moed. I'll prove it to you that Rosh Chodesh sometimes can be referred to as Moed, as fixed time or a Yom Tov. He said, we know it says at the Eden, that the 29th day of Sivan, the Meraglim were sent out to spy on the land of Israel, to reconnoiter the land. And they came back 40 days later, and they told the bad tidings about Israel, that it's beyond our capacity to conquer Israel. All Eden cried, and Hashem, Gemara in Tainas, we had end of Tainas, Hashem was so angry. Why should they cry for naught? They don't trust me. I'm going to give them plenty of reason to cry, and that was Tisha B'Av. So if you calculate, generally Tammuz is only 29 days. If they left the 29th day of Sivan, then what would happen is they would have returned on Tisha B'Av. On the day of Tisha B'Av, they returned, and the following night they cried. So it should have been Asiri B'Av. It should have been Asiri B'Av, that it should be the day that all the terrible things happened. Why is it on Tisha B'Av? So it must be that particular Tammuz was a 30-day month. Generally, Tammuz is a 29-day month. That year was a 30-day month, and the only way you can have a 30-day month is we have 2 days of Chodesh. So the Rabbanim added another day of Rosh Chodesh. So the pasuk says, "Amar Abaye, Tammuz Ahishasa, Tammuz of that year, Meloy Malai was a full month, 30 days." You see, it says in the pasuk, "Kara alai moyed." Call on me an extra day of Rosh Chodesh, which the pasuk refers to Yom Tov, in order Lishbai Bachura, to destroy my young, to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Clearly for me, Rosh Chodesh is referred to as Moed. Interesting. The bulk of the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed on the 10th day of Av. The fire was kindled in the 9th day, late afternoon. So it was mainly the 10th day of Av. And it seems because the Gemara had a Havim in it, that actually it was the 10th day of Av when Hashem said, "You're crying for nothing," even though in the Maskana it was the 9th day of Av. Nevertheless, the Havim in the Torah is also Torah. As it always proves, even if you just learn the Gemara's question, you have to still make Birchas HaTorah. So it could be just a Havin alone already did the damage that it was meant to do. Rabbi Yechon says, even though Rameh said that all Yom Tovim are equal, but there's one kapara that none of the Yom Tovim Rosh Chodesh can do, and that is the Seir Hanasa B'fnim, the goat in the Mizbeah, in the Beis Hamikdash, on Yom Kippur, that they sprinkle the blood in the Kodesh HaKadoshim in the Heichel. That is a Seir Hanasa B'fnim, and that is only coming to atone a case where you have Yediyah in the beginning, but no Yediyah at the end. So no, you should bring a carbon once you find out, and not only that carbon takes care of that. No, none of the other ones can deal with that one. And that the Sin Asafnim does not deal with the other three cases that the Yom Tevim and Rosh Chodesh and Sin Chutzki deals with, and nor can they deal with the case that Sin Asafnim deals with, which is Yediyah B'tchila and no Yediyah B'sayt. Who ain't mechaper kaparasa? How do I know that he cannot take care of their kaparach mechaper kaparas? That he could only that the sira nasa b'fnim can only deal with a tumah where there's only one kapara for it and there's no other kapara for it. It says achas b'shan is only one kapara. So if there's only one kapara, therefore it means that Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh cannot deal with it. That is the case of Yediyah B'tchila. And nor hein ein mechaper kaparas, nor can they, because Amakra says the pasuk. Achaz bashana. Only once a year is there a kapara for this particular avera. Not Yom Tov, not Chodesh, and so on. Kapara will take once a year. In fact, we'll just wait in the Brisa. It says, if you had no big yedid in the beginning, no yedid in the end, or you had no yedid in the beginning, but you did have a yedid in the end, or these are three different examples of tumah. Then, what is the kapara for that? Se'idi the golim, se'idi the Chodesh, and se'idi nasa b'chutz v'chaprit. So it does not mention the seir nasa b'fnim, which comes to deal with a case where there was yedi in the beginning, at the end. Shayora, it doesn't mention the seir. It only mentions seir nasa b'chutz and Yom Tov. It doesn't mention the seir nasa b'fnim in the Brisa, nor the kaparasan, nor the tumah that it's forgiving for is mentioned here either, because it's only exclusively dealt with by the seir nasa b'fnim. Then we go back to the Mishnah. Rab Shimon came along and said that this Eid Rosh Chodesh is not like you learn all you Tanoim learn that it's dealing with a case of a person who was tummy and forgot. No, it's dealing with a person who was tired and he ate a carbon which was tummy. Says the Gemara, how does he know that? Rab Shimon holds each one's exclusive, not like Rameya that they all overlap, or they're not overlap. They all deal with the same kaparas. No, he says each one's exclusive, like the Rabbi Yehuda learned, but he just argues and says the Chodesh is on its own. So let's understand. What do you mean? This is the first version of Shimon Yochai, because of Shimon Yehuda we'll soon see he learned differently. So it says the Gemara. When Daf Yud Amar the bottom, we're just starting here the next sugya. So Rab Shimon argues with Rameir, who says that all the Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh and Seir Nasa B'chutz cover all three different types of tumas, except the one that Seir Nasa B'fnim does, which is if you knew in the beginning and you forgot and you never remembered. So you have Rav Shimon Yochai, he says, but Rosh Chodesh is different. Rosh Chodesh is not covering a tumah like you, Rabbi Yehuda says that no, that if you didn't know the beginning, you didn't know the end, so Rosh Chodesh and Yom Tov deal with the same thing. No, he said Rosh Chodesh is different. The Yom Tovim is if no yedi in the beginning and no yedi at the end. But you know what Rosh Chodesh is? A toir she'achal kodesh. You yourself were toir, something totally different. And you were toir, but the food, the carbon you ate was tummy. And we want to know how he knows that. 5 lines about I understand why Rosh Chodesh cannot be mechaper for what Yom Tov does. No, Rosh Chodesh is only exclusively what it does. But the Amakra, we already said before, it says the pasuk Avon, that when Moshe Rabbeinu reprimanded the Aaron and everything else and his children, why they didn't need from that korban Rosh Chodesh and the Rosh Chodesh Nisan when they dedicated the Chanukas Mishkan, why they didn't need it. He said they were so that whole carbon there was Nasan Lechem Lassi, says Avon Eda. It was such an important carbon. It's there to carry the sin and to expiate their sin. But it says Avon in singular form. It sounds like clear Rosh Chodesh only does one kapara. And that's why Hashem Yechai says only one kapara, Torah Shachal Kodesh. So I understand why Rosh Chodesh does not deal with a case with the animal itself, where the person himself was tummy and didn't have ED in the beginning or the end, because only Rosh Chodesh can only deal with one. Only deal with one, fine. Ella did a golim, but Yom Tif. Why is Yom Tov limited only to a case where you were tamei, you didn't know the beginning and end? Why don't we also include, like I made at least partially, that Yom Tov should also be mechaper on the case where you were tired and you ate kodesh? It'll go in Yechaper and Chadashim. Should also be mechaper on that. Because why wait from 1 month to the next month if there's a Yom Tov in the middle? Let the Yom Tov take care of that. So I'm saying Amakra, because in the same pasuk of Chodesh says va'oisa, which is also singular. Only that carbon is able to carry that avera, no other carbon. Amakra oisa at a nice oven. Vein acha nice oven. No other carbon musif will deal with this particular sin. Okay, so B. Now let's go weiter. Remember, everyone is in isolation. B. Shlomo did a golim lemechaper at Yom Kippurim. I understand why Yom Tov does not take care of the tumah that Yom Kippur takes care of. Yom Kippur, we said the seir nasa b'chutz. What does it do? In the case we had no yidi in the beginning, but you did have yidi in the end. And we hold, except for Rabbi Shmuel, that there's no carbon involved over there. You never bring a carbon, and that's what the seir nasa b'chutz does. So I understand why Yom Tov cannot deal with that. Why not? Because Al Makra, it says the pasuk achas b'shana. If you remember, it says twice in that pasuk, achas b'shana, once a year. It says over there that the kohen, and we'll come back to this soon. That the kohen goes out there and he says in pasuk chipad Aaron al karnoisav. He goes ahead and he's mechaper karnoisav achas b'shana once a year, and then he says, what does he use? He used the blood of the chapsach kapurim, and then it says achas b'shana yichaper lov. Again, it says achas b'shana. So achas b'shana yichaper lov means only once a year there's a kapara for that. Okay, or only that once a year we learn two things from there. From the first Achaz B'Shana, we learn out that you could only we're talking about the Sir Nasa B'Fnim because Karnoisav Mizbech of the inner Mizbech. So we're talking about the Sir Nasa B'Fnim, and then we're going to compare the Chutz to the Fnim. That if the first Achaz tells you that he can only mechaper on a tumor that there's nothing else being mechaper it. So therefore, if you can tell me Yom Tov Mechaper as well, then Yom Kippur won't do it. Yom Kippur can only is the only exclusive means of being Mechaper on this. So that's what we said on a Nasa B'Fnim, and we'll use the same thing on Nasa B'Chutz. This we learned before, and we also learned that Achaz B'Shana tells you that only once a year there's a kapara for this, which means Yom Tov and other things cannot apply for that. Yeah, we learned two things from that pasuk. So now the Gemara says. So we're asking, Bishloima did a golin lemechaper Yom Kippur. You understand why Yom Tov is unable to mechaper that which Yom Kippur is. Achaz b'shana, that this kapara, and says the pasuk achaz b'shana kapara. It says in the pasuk the second achaz b'shana. It says over there achaz b'shana yichaper all of the derech. Okay, so once a year you have a kapara for this. Is loitehei al achaz b'shana. For this particular case, only once a year, even though it's talking about seir nasa b'fnim, because it says muvad. Regarding the Sir Nasa B'chutz, says Muvad. In addition, so we say that this is continuing whatever the first one is. So we compare the outside to the first carbon, to the inner carbon. Why doesn't Yom Kippur also, okay, besides the Sir Nasa B'chutz, instead of why is it only Mechaper? Why is it only mechaper on the case of there's no yidi in the beginning, but yidi in the end? Why isn't also mechaper case there's no yidis at all? Let Yom Kippur deal with whatever Yom Tov deals with. Amakros, Gemara says, because there's a second time. It says in the pasuk in the beginning that the chipper Aaron HaKohen. Achaz bashana, that tells you what it can only deal with. It can only be mechaper something which there is no other kapara for, excluding Yom Tov and the can deal with that. Kapara achaz mechaper kapara. It's not mechaper kaparas. Even though it's mechaper for you didn't know you were tummy, you walked in the base of English, you know tummy 80 carbon, that's two kaparas. But that's not what we mean by two kaparas. What we mean two kaparas is that there's another opportunity to mechaper this. Like Yom Tov, the carbon musaf on Yom Tov mechaper doesn't Kippur couldn't do it. Because in Kippur can only mechaper the kind of tumor that there's no other carbon that takes care of that. But it itself can deal with two things. It itself can deal with if you're tummy, you walked in the base of English, or you were tummy and you ate from kabbalas. Two different averis, but that it can deal with because there's no other carbon that deals with that in this particular case where you had no yidi in the beginning, but you had a yidi in the end. Fine. This whole passage is talking about a seir that you do inside, where you sprinkle on the aron and the hechel, and we're asking about the seir and nasa b'chutz, the carbon musaf that you did on Yom Kippur. Makro, that's what answer. It says in the pasuk that the seir easy did outside is movad chatzas in addition to the chatzas kippurim. In other words, it connects to it. We compare the two. Okay, now we go to Shimon Yehuda. That Shimon ben Yehuda understanding of Shibud Chay was very different. He agreed with everything we said, but he changes one very important thing. He says Rosh Chodesh is limited only to a case of a Torah that eats Chodesh, that's Tameh. Yom Tov does that plus. There's no Yediyas. Yom Kippur does what Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh does, plus where there was no Yedi in the beginning, Yedi at the end. Now we're going to try to understand Shimon ben Yehuda's version. Says Shimon Yehuda, no, I don't understand. Why is it that Rosh Chodeshim, you tell me, but in between. Oh, what happened in between? Rosh Chodesh, they come from the next day. Why wait till the following month? Yom Tov will take care of it. But we're going to have a problem. We just learned two dinim from Rosh Chodesh. It says oven in singular. That means Rosh Chodesh is going to deal with one. But the same pasuk says oisa, that this is the only carbon that's able to deal with it. So what's going on there? If you believe in the oven, and that's why you would have said Rosh Chodesh only deals with one, then you also have to believe in the first part of the pasuk oisa. And yet you're telling Maisa that the Yom Tov can take care of what Rosh Chodesh does. How does that work? So you want to ask a question. Why is it you yourself a major that Rosh Chodesh cannot deal with Yom Tov, the Makra? So what's going to deal with one sin, not two? That same pasuk, the regalim nami loy nichbur Rosh Chodesh. Yom Tov should not be able to deal with what Rosh Chodesh deal with because Amakra, this pasuk oisa. It says that only this carbon can deal with whatever that tum is. Oisa oisa oven. So the Gemara says oisa le mashmalei. He agrees with the drasha of oven, but he doesn't say that ois is coming to limit and nothing else. He's just telling you this is the carbon that should have been. Why did you burn it? You should have gone ahead and eaten it. He didn't mean to exclude Yom Tov. Okay, let's now deal with Yom Kippur. You're telling me that Yom Kippur can deal with the tumah that Yom Tov deals with. No yidi in beginning, no yidi end. But the Yom Tov cannot deal with the tumah of Yom Kippur, which is that you had no yidi in the beginning, but yidi in the end. Let's understand why it works one way. Before we explained why Rav Shimon and Yochai hold each one is separate, and now we're trying to send Rav Shimon Yehuda's version that you can go from Yom Tov to Yom Kippur, but you could go from Yom Kippur to Yom Tov. Says the Gemara. What was the reason we said that Yom Tov cannot be mechaper or Yom Kippur mechaper? So it says achas bashana. It says once a year. That this kapara only for this particular tumah only applies once a year. So obviously Yom Tov can do it. So you're dashing the achas bashana yechaper, the second achas bashana. Only once a year you can do that. So therefore Yom Tov can do that. No, the same pasuk in the beginning of the pasuk is also achas b'shana, and we said before that Yom Kippur can only deal with a kind of a tumah that no other there's no other opportunity to deal with that tumah. So if you believe in achas b'shana, the second one, you should believe in the first one, and therefore you'll tell me that Yom Tov cannot deal with that tumah, and Yom Kippur cannot deal with other tumah. So too, Yom Kippur should not be able to forgive as a regalim because achas ksiv. It could only deal with a tumah. You tell me that Yom Kippur can not only deal with a tumah that you didn't know in the beginning, you knew the end, but Yom Kippur also can take care of a tumah we had no ideas at all. In other words, Yom Kippur can do what Yom Tov does. But it says achas b'shana. The first achas b'shana you tell me is Yom Kippur can only deal with a tumah that there is no other carbon for. Only one kapara, which is Kippur. In other words, Yom Tov can't deal with it. And now you tell me that Yom Kippur can deal with it, because that was the first achas b'shana. So when it answers kapara it cannot deal with chayda. The most question is Yom Kippur cannot deal with something that there's another kapara there. So we answer achas lemashlei. He doesn't believe in the first achas. What are you talking about? And why? Because that achas is limited. The pasuk is talking about this ear that you do inside, which is only because you sprinkle it on the oren, on the heichel. That's what the pasuk is talking about, and that comes to exclusively for a tumah, which there was a yedi in the beginning and no yedi at the end. It doesn't make sense. You're using the second achas for the seir nasa b'chutz and telling me that. That there's only one kapara a year, and therefore Yom Tov cannot deal with what Yom Kippur, and you did bother you that it's too much in b'chutz. And then you tell me, but regarding what Yom Kippur could deal with the Yom Tov, it says in the beginning of the pasuk, achas b'shana can only deal with a tumah that you only have one kapara a year. That's too much in b'fnim. How's that work? Then Yom Tov should be able to deal with Yom Kippur. The chiksiv achas b'sin b'fnim ksiv. It's only talking about achas mashmalei. He agrees that of course he agrees that achas b'shana. The shiny hach here is different. The Makro, it says in the pasuk the chiper and the first achas b'shana doesn't talk about the carbon; it talks about where you sprinkle the blood. And because the Torah narrows down where you sprinkle the blood, and there it's only seir nasa b'fnim. The seir nasa b'chutz you don't sprinkle on the aron kodesh. You don't sprinkle on the heichel and the paraychas. You sprinkle is outside and outer mizbeach. So this half of the pasuk is definitely not dealing with the seir nasa b'chutz. V'shayni hochad omakro, it says the pasuk, v'chiper aron al kanoisav achas bashana, kanoisav the mizbech hapnimiu. What's the kanoisav? We're talking about the inner mizbech, the inner carbon. The kapora achas mechaper, the eina mechaper stay kaporas. Only the inner seira nasa b'fnim has the capacity to mechaper a kind of a tumor that there's nothing else, no other opportunities to mechaper. So that's a case where you had knowledge in the beginning, then no knowledge post. When it comes to the outer zbeich, we're not going to equate it because we're not talking about the carbon. If we're talking about the animal itself, then we say that the outer is similar to the inner. So, for example, we say that what? That this is the only one that's mechaperit, nothing else is mechaperit. Okay, but what do you call it? The first achas b'shana, which we learned that it can only mechaper something without no other opportunity, that's only shenaz afnim, not the shenaz b'chutz. So therefore, the shenaz b'chutz can also include in its kapara a tumor where you had no yidi in the beginning and no yidi in the end. Yom Tov does the same thing. So what? That's not a problem. After the kapara is that finishes that part of the sugya. Omar Ula, Omar Rabbi Yechon, comes along Ula and said, Rabbi Yechon, we're starting a new sugya now, but it relates back to our Mishnah, which we'll see tomorrow. Ula says, Rabbi Yechon, what happened was that every year we had this in Shkolim, but it's only Yerushalmi that we all learned part of that. I mean, then in Shkolim it talks about that every year you had to collect the Shkolim, and 3 times a year they would then distribute the money to buy kabbanas, and then it comes to Chodesh Nisan. You have to use the new money. You can no longer use the old money. And what do you do with the remnant? What do you do with leftover money from the previous year from the Shkolim? They would use it to coat gold in the Kodesh HaKadosh. They use it for maintenance. So what happened was, this is Rashi's version, and the Shagazaya has a big question about Rashi, but nobody really answers it. It says that you have to be mevakir. Whenever you bring a korban in the base of Mikdash, you have to check out for mumin 4 days in advance. So they would have always 6 sheep. In the afternoon, they would take sheep for that day is also included, and they would have 6 sheep there. So you have 4 days that you can monitor to see whether there are any movement. Sometimes you don't see the movement directly; it takes a little time. So they always had 6 sheep. Comes the last day of Adar. Comes the last day of Adar, they had 6 sheep there in the pen, and they brought 2 that day. You had 4 left over. What do you do with that 4 left over? You couldn't bring it to Chodesh Nisan because you now have to, whatever kabbanas you bring in the Mizbeach has to be from the new money, from the new Chadash, the new Shkolim, not from the old Shkolim. So what did they do with the 4 animals? So what they did for animals, they had to redeem them, to make them chulin, and then they would buy back the animals with the new money and use them as a carbon. So it says like this. Now, normally we have a rule. This is the problem. Normally we have a rule that once it's consecrated, you cannot be paid unless it has a mum. So we always say Yirachi Yistayev, let him wander about till the contract's a mum, and then you paid in the moment. Here, outright, you're being paid the animals that are suitable to be kodesh. So Rabbi Yechon comes along and says you can do that. In this case, you can do that. And the Muslim want to know why. Amarullah, Rabbi Yechon, and Ulzin Rabbi Yechon.
To someone outside.
Yeah, but you're supposed to be paid with chulin money. You can only use. You cannot take because the obvious question is use the kodesh money, the new money, and just buy these animals. You cannot be paid a hegdish on hegdish. You have to use chulin money. So there has to be something in between. So Amar Rabbi Yechon, Timidin shlehutzchul tzibur, Timidin that you don't need any more. You use 4 leftover kabbanas. That's how Rashi explains what lehutzchul tzibur is. Nivdin tmimin. In this case, you can redeem them even while they're tmimim. You can redeem them. That's what Rabbi Yechon says. The problem they have with Rashi is, if you remember Hillel, in Morim Psachim, we learned that Hillel, when he used to bring the Korban Pesach or any carbon, he wouldn't be makdash it until it's mamash inside the Beis Hamikdash. And then he would be makdash it. Why? Because you're not allowed to steal. You're not allowed to be moil from hegdish. Once you make something hegdish, you can't use it for your own benefit. And therefore, he was always worried that maybe he'll be moil. So what he did was, he wouldn't make it kodesh until he brought it. So it seems from Rashi that these 6 animals, they made it kodesh straight away. And that's why the problem. Because if he didn't make a kodesh till you actually brought it up in the Mizbeach as a carbon terminal tzibur, what's the problem? It's not kodesh. And they want to know what forced Rashi to learn that they will makdish it straight away. And the Shagazaya brings a whole bunch of proofs into the Yevon that you didn't have to be makdish it. And they remember the Tzorchid. I haven't seen anybody answer Rashi, but others learn there's other things we're talking about here. T'midin shalahutzchul tzibur for other reasons. But they weren't. But Rashi seems to learn that they were makdish straight away, and therefore the only way to redeem it is that you have to be paid it. because it's kodesh. The more doesn't spell out that what we're talking about here. That we're talking about those four. More to me, it might be other reasons why hutzchu. So, for example, other way of learning is he got lost, so they brought another carbon in his place, and now you have it left over. Anyway, Yosef Rabba Kamal Shmaita. Rabba repeated this sugya in the name of Rabbi Yechon. Omalei, his sparring partner Rabbi Chizda said to him, "Man tzayis l'chol Rabbi Yechon Rabba. Who listens to you and Rabbi Yechon Rabba?" From here they bring a raya that Rabba actually learned by Rabbi Yechon, even though Rabbi Yechon was in Etzisro and Rabba was in Bavel. That Rabba learned by Rabbi Yechon as well. Bring from other places. It seemed that Rabba actually learned Rabbi Yechon, which is interesting. When, what happened? When did he learn by Rabbi Yechon? Anyway, so Rabbi Chizda said, "Who will listen to you? What's the problem?" What happened to the kedusha? The only time you can be paid an animal is if you has a mum, and this animal is tamim. How can you be paid it? On Malay, so let's follow the Shaklatarius. We have to finish this, at least half the sugya to understand, otherwise I get lost. So Malay said to him, "Atle Tizber, you don't agree to English. You don't agree that you don't agree that it doesn't bother us. I mean, we don't say Kedusha. I'll prove it to you from other places that we redeem Kodesh without worrying about how did the Kedusha disappear. It's not good enough. You pay the Kodesh directly to Chulin, and the Kedusha evaporates. I'll prove it to you." But now we learned Moiser Hak Titus, the leftover Titus. What happened was on Yom Kippur, every year they set aside, you have to have a manna, half a manna in the morning, half a manna in the afternoon. They would set aside 368 mannas. Why 368? 365 every single day. Right? The Kohen Gadol, the Chavisa Kohen Gadol, half a manna in the morning, half a manna in the afternoon. They made chalas, and Machlek is showing you whether he made 12 chalas every week. Whether he did one full challah in the morning, one full challah in the afternoon, or he did 6 halves, halves and then half. All right. But what do you call it? So they think why 368, 365 every single day of the year, even though some, we do Shnas Lavanda, but every 368, 11, 14, 17, 19, we made an Ibir leap year, which was more so that it evened out. But then you had the 3 extra money. Why? Because on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol, in addition to that, would have to put Malay Chafn of his fist in there, so we had to make it a bigger pile, but it was always leftover. In fact, every 60 or 70 years, there was enough for half. They had enough for half of 368. But the thing is, at the end of every year, you had leftovers. So we learned, Moiser Hak Titus, the leftover of the Titus. What did they do with that? So this is what they did to make it. They wouldn't have kodesh lying around. So what they did was an elaborate scheme. This is what they did. A number of steps. You couldn't go straight from taking kodesh and making it chulin by just taking chulin money and buying it, or even taking the wages of the people who made the kodesh and just paying them with the kodesh, so that becomes chulin and then buying it back from them. Because as Rashi says, it's a zilzul. So shan looks like a commodity, and this is kodesh. We don't want to do that. Buy animals. Everybody buys animals all the time. It doesn't look like it's kodesh, but when it comes to kodesh, no one's allowed to replicate it. So when you see the kodesh, you know right away this is the base of English, and it looks like you're selling and buying and selling. That's a zilzul. So it made an elaborate scheme. And this is what they did. We had more scholar. Okay, they had to pay wages, and the wages that they paid for this tradesman was from the lishcha. Okay, from lishcha. And then what would they do? We're talking about the problem here is what's the problem? Why do you have to bechal paid it? Because remember, you have to use the new money. You have the traders comes the Chodesh Nisan, whatever traders you set aside from your kippur last year, you can no longer use because you have to use the new money. So you have to take it out and bring it back in. So how did they take it out, the kedusha, and bring it back in? So this is what they did. So you have to pay wages, and comes would you take it from the lishcha? You had the money to pay the wages. So we say over here.
That money was for Kabbalas.
But they had different lishchas. One lishcha was for kabbanas, and one lishcha was for pay, repairs. So now we have to pay. We're trying to think of a way of how to clean the money, basically to clean the money. So to clean the Titus? How do we clean the Titus that it's no longer kodesh, and then we'll make it back kodesh? Okay, so this is what they did. They were set it aside. The way Rashi learns is they didn't actually pay the umnin. They set it aside. Some gabbai came in and was on behalf of them. Okay, they have to get paid a 10 million. They have to get paid a certain amount of money, and we'll set aside the Keteda as if this is in lieu of their payment. And then they would take cash that they had to pay the umnin, right? And they would and they would say, okay, this Keteda will exchange. We'll give the Keteda instead of the cash that we set aside for the umnin. That means they were coin already. That this money now belongs to umnin. We would take this Keteda and give it, swap it over to them. Bischara, and this is their wage. Oh, exactly. But they didn't get it in the hand. It was set aside in Bezeichem. Teshuvah has a problem with that because that means you need them to acknowledge it and what's going on in there. But this is what happened. So that's the next step. So meanwhile, now the Torah became chulin because it became payment of chulin to the women. Bischar their wages. Then the chayzim v'loichanoishim b'tum chadasha. Then they went to the umnin and bought it from the umnin, even though they didn't ask the umnin. But never, the whole thing doesn't make sense because the word mafrishin sounds like they weren't even involved. The way Rashi learns is that this is payment and then what's going on there, like a tacit agreement. Mafrishin sounds like they don't involve at all. We just set it aside. But bottom line is we had these three steps, and they buy with the new money, and that's how they gave them the new money. And they gave them the new money exactly. They bought it from the umnin with the new money, but now they became kodesh again. The question is, how did you take the kodesh and change it from kedusha to chulin? Kedusha leheichen azla, leheichen hocha. Is that it's not an issue? That's what the Rabbi is saying. How can this work? Name kedusha leheichen hocha. Where'd it go? Malay. So Chiza answers back. You're asking me a question from Ketedus. When is there a problem? Kedusha leheichen azla. Only remember, there's two kinds of ways of of making something holy. One is kedusha's dummy, one kedusha's goof. Kedusha's goof means that I think itself becomes holy. Kedusha doesn't mean that the representative holy. It's the value of it. I don't really want this thing itself. Sell it with the money. We'll make it. We'll use it for something holy. So it says Abchiza. Kedusha's goof is my problem. That if something like these animals were kaddish already, how can you go ahead and turn it into chulin? How can you do that? But kedusha's damim, when something itself is not holy, no problem. And ketaydish is only kedusha's damim. The kedusha's damu. It's only kedusha's damim. So Rabbah felt that ketaydish, he would crush it with this, hammer, this mortar. The mortar itself is a clay shot, it's a tool of the base of English, and it made the ketaydish kedusha goof. And Abchizda held no, that this is not called a clay shot, it's not a keli, and if it's only kedusha's damim ketaydish, and that's why that's not a problem. So Gemara
would be the same thing.
No. Kabbalah, you make the animal holy to use on the Mizbeach. What's a Kabbalah? You set aside these 6 animals because you're going to use them for carbon tamid. So what you're doing is every animal becomes the Kedushas Haguf. It becomes itself holy. So the Rabbi says, Rabbi, how can you just take it out of a Kedusha and turn it chulin? So Rabbi says back to him, you don't believe that you can? What about Ketedus? Ketedus is also Kedushas Haguf. And the Rabbi says, no, it's not Kedushas Haguf because breaking with the hammer, it's not called a keli that you put it inside. It's not Kedushas Haguf. Says the Gemara, okay, so Rabbah says back to Rav Chiza, you argue that Tradish is only Kedusha Damim. There's a chumrah that we have by a Tvul Yom, but somebody really went to the mikveh, but he has to wait for the sun to set. And the sun hasn't set yet, he's called a Tvul Yom. A Tvul Yom is only a Sheni. When you come, remember, there's the degrees of Tum, it's only a Sheni, so when it touches Chulin, nothing happens. Because by Chulin, the end of the line is a second generation, nothing happens. But if a Tvul Yom touches Truma, it becomes a shlishi and becomes puzzle. It can't go any further, but it becomes puzzle. So now, when does a tvul yom metame? Only if it's l'chayda kedusha guf. And yet, by ketedus, we see that a tvul yom is metame. It says Rabbi does not prove that what is the ketedus? The moment you crush it, it's already kedusha guf, like I'm saying. And yet we're able to redeem it straight out. So look, it says it. Rabbi says the light possible but full yom. A full yom should not disqualify it. Alamatanya. Why did we learn that nitma b'machteshes? If you put this in the machteshes, nifsula but full yom, passel full yom, which proves that what? That the moment you crush it, it's kedushas haguf. That's why if a full yom touches it, it becomes passel. And yet you could just straight out pay it off to the workers. What does that prove? And we're not worried about kedusha leheichen azla. Says the Gemara. So Rabbi then says, so what are you going to answer me? You're going to tell me that you believe it's only kedusha's damim, but you believe that kedusha's damim tvul yom is passel also. Who told you that tvul yom can only passel a case of kedusha's haguf? That's what Rabbi's proof. Rav Chizah will argue that a tvul yom, even if it's the kedusha here is not kedusha's haguf, just the money of it is enough kodesh that a tvul yom can passel it. So no problem. So it's only Kedusha Damim. And that's why you want to say there's no issue of whether the Kedusha go. But you're asking me, am I Tamidin, which is Kedusha Guf? What happened? Yeah? So the Chitem, you're going to try to answer me. You can answer me, Kol Kedusha Damim, Mitzvah Yoim, that Kedusha Damim also because Puzzle Yoim. I'll prove you you're wrong. But now we learned in a Mishnah, it says, Hamenachas, when it comes to a carbon mincha, Moilin Behen, Mishahugdushu. The moment you say that this flour should be set aside for Karm Mincha, it belongs out to the Hegdish. And if you use it for your own personal use, you're a Mayil, you're stealing, and you have all the laws of Meila, which we'll learn in Sech Meila. Then it goes the next step. What about Kotru Bekli? You actually will Mekadosh it. Now, Huchshu, you're prepared now for it's ready for Li Pasul to become Pasul, B'Tvul Yom. What do we see clearly from here? When does a Tvul Yom Pasul? Only after you made it, put it in the cave of Yusaguf. Otherwise, Tvul Yom would have Pasul even before Huchshu. As soon as you set it aside and you said that this is Ketaitis, okay? So wait a second, it doesn't mention Ketaitis at all. It just says, oh, when is a Tvul Yom Pasul? Only Yusaguf. So we see a general rule. Think about Ketaitis right now. A general rule that a Tvul Yom does not Pasul the moment you made the Mincha holy, because at that stage it's only Kedusha Damim. It's only when you put it into a Kelim, it becomes Kedusha Guf. And only then does a Tvul Yom Pasul. So what do you see? So Rabbi says, you see, a Tvul Yom can only Pasul Kedusha Guf. And since by Ketaitis it says that Tvul Yom is Pasul after you crush it, that means that's Kedusha Guf. And yet you can straight out redeem it. That proves that we're not worried about Kedusha Lehechan Ozla. That's what Rabbi is saying. And then it says it. So a Pasul Tvul Yom or a Mechusik Kippurim, better yet, you already had sunset. But you need to bring, let's say you're in your situation, you need to bring Kabbanis in the morning. You call them Mechusik Kippurim. It ruins it. By Kabbanis, we go even to Revi. Ubelina, if you stay overnight, the din is that once something was consecrated as a carbon, if it stays overnight, you cannot use it anymore. Kochu Bekli, it says clearly from here, only if you're Makadish in the Keli in, then we have a problem of a Tvul Yom. Because it's like goof. Oh, but like, Kochu be like. So Chizik counters back. He says, so Elamai, so what are you on? You Rabbi want to prove from here. Now, well, Kedusha Gufi, right? You want to say that a Tvul Yom only possible by Kedusha Guf. That's what you're trying to prove. So that's the question. Elamai, so you're telling me that, and you want to go ahead and say that Ketaitis is Kedusha Guf, because the first Bryce it says that Tvul Yom ruins the Ketaitis once you crush it, which means you're telling me that Ketaitis is Kedusha Guf. What do we know about Kedusha Guf as well? That if it stays overnight, it becomes possible. No, so how is it Ketaitis you make in the beginning of the year for the whole year? How can that work? According to your logic, I say that Ketaitis and Kedusha is dummy, says no problem, and you can prepare the beginning of the year for the whole year. But you're saying that it's Kedusha Guf, right? So according to you, you should possibly ask a question. And forget about the whole year. Allah Matram, we looked at clean the Mishnah. Hakoimis, when you have a carbon mincha, what you do is you scoop out a little bit with your 3 fingers, and we'll learn the Gemara says that the most difficult job is, to put, especially if it's already baked. Sometimes when you do a flour, sometimes after it's baked, and yet you have to put it in with your fingers, and you put that on the beich. Now, alavaina, they used to put in the mincha, this frankincense, they put in some kind of spice, and first they did kmitza, then they put alavaina on top of that, and they put it on the beich. And Titus, it mentions the Titus. Minchas kainim, the mincha of a kain is different than the mincha of Yisrael. When a flour offering is brought by a kain, cold here, the entire thing gets burned. When a Yisrael brings a flour offering, the kain scoops out a little bit, and the rest the kain eats. Minchas kain meshuach, and the mincha of a kain godel. Minchas nesachi, the mincha that you bring along with libations with a carbon. Moilin behen. Okay, you just said that this is holy, so then you're stealing. But mishu hoop to shoot. But once you made it kodesh, now it's krusla guf. Sorry, once you said verbally, this is a carbon, and you use it for yourself, you're stealing. Or but if you went ahead and put it inside a clay shardus, now now becomes ready possible for yaim. Like I said before, you possible yaim. Uva mechusik purim. Uva lina says clearly here that lina, once it's kaddish laguf, there's lina. It seems kachur b'klei in like kachur b'klei loy. So it says clearly here that lina is kedusha guf, and you hold that as kedusha guf status. No. So how come it says in the Bryce on top of the page that once you use a crusher, you're only chayiv by full yoim? The Bryce also should have said you're also lina, because you tell me it's considered kedusha guf. Why is it a mitlina? Amalei said, but that's not a problem. I hold that kedusha guf, and full yoim is the guf. And therefore, Ketayis is not a question on Tamidin. Here, another example, a precedent. Kedusha the goof, and you can just straight away swap out the Kedusha. So why doesn't it mention Lina? And also, how can you do the beginning of the year for the whole year? Lina Kamri, you want to ask about Lina? Shainik Toidus. Very different. You know why? Hoyil v'tzurasa b'chol hashana kula. The whole idea of Lina is we say that the tzura, over time, it sort of loses its freshness, it loses its form. It's not coveted that it should be used in the base of English. But he says over here that Lina by Ketayis is not a problem. It doesn't change. So if you put, the Bryce says clearly that there is a problem with Lina. The Bryce is talking about you put it inside a keli. If you put it, this is what Taisa explains. When you put it inside a keli, it looks like anything else. If we let it stay overnight, people will make a mistake and think, oh, well, there's no problem here. You trade it the next day, what's the carbon? So the Rabbanan stepped in and said, you know what? If you put it inside a keli by Ketayis, Lina is no good. Even though there's no deformities here, but if all you did was you used a crusher, which is also Kedusha's Haguf, but since there's no deformity and everybody can tell it's different than Kabbanas, we're not going to make a mistake because it's not inside a keli. And this is a special utensil used for crushing the what do you call it, the Ketayis. So therefore, the Rabban didn't even ask. So therefore, Rabbi said, so they have no question. So what do you mean have no question? But the question is still a question. So you brought me another example where you have Kedusha's Aguf. But the question is, what happened to the Kedusha? What happened to the Kedusha? Rav says this introduces a new concept. Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleah. When initially Bezdin went ahead and was makdish, let's say these four, all these 6 kabbanas these animals they bring into the pen to examine, or the traders that they prepare in the beginning of the year, it's as if Leiv Bezdin, they don't have to verbalize it, it's just in the heart. We understand it's obvious, that's what they mean. It's as if they make a condition as follows. If we need these animals for carbon, if we need this, if this is, out of 368, not all the money were used, 366 and a half were used, whatever it is. If they need it, then they'll be part of traders. But the Imlav, the Haled man, and if not, is a way that means initially all it was set aside for the money, or now we'll revert it to money. But the bottom line is, we're not taking the Kedusha never happened in the first place, or retrospectively as if it never happened. Or we made a condition that from this moment, from the beginning, that this moment it turns back. But generally speaking, you're right. You can't take an animal that was Kodesh and just turn it into Chulin. You have to wait till the contract's a mum. In the case of the carbon tummy, in the case of the Kodesh, it was a condition. There's 2 more lines. He says, you yourself said, Hikdish Zachar Ledamav. If let's say you makdish a male ram, and you said this male ram, even though it's suitable for the mizbech, I just want that the money, the value, and the hegek, do whatever they want with it. The din is Kaddish Kedusha Laguf. It becomes automatically Kaddish Kedusha Laguf. You cannot sell it because once you set it aside, and since it's suitable for the mizbech, it is Kaddish. Now, if Bezin Masna Lein, Madoch in the case with Bezin doesn't spell it out. We understand that's what they mean. It's good enough to say it's not Kaddish. This guy verbally said, I don't want this animal to be holy. I just want the value of the animal to be holy. And yet you tell me too late, too bad. So how do you tell me that Lev Bezin Masna and the whole concept doesn't make sense? That's Rabbi's question. But it's like Kasha, it's not a question. Depends what you said. What do you mean? If you said that I want this animal, the value of the animals, to belong to Hegesh, and with the money, they should buy another animal if they want to for a Mizbech. Since what you're limiting it is to use as a carbon, and the very original animal is suitable for that same carbon, so why in the world should we downgrade this animal and change it for money, and then, buy an animal, use this original animal? That's when we say that you're stuck. You can't get out of it. But if you said, I makdish this animal, but I'm not makdish the animal itself. I want the value of the animal, and with the money they should buy in the nesachim. Now this animal can't turn into nesachim, so then your tanai helps. So the same thing over here. When it comes to the animals, they say we want these animals to, they make a lebez and masna lane, as if they're saying, if you can't use the animal with the money, do something else with it, and use it for better. Use something else with it. So therefore, lev bezin masna lane. If they're saying that use it for the carbon, and if not the money should be used for this carbon, then they can't do that either. They're saying that with the money that you're swapping the animal for, use it for the wages of these people. is, in other words, using for something else. Then if you yourself can make such a condition, and so can Bezin let us away. Okay. Anyway, we'll stop over here. The Gemara will continue discussing this concept of lev bezin masnale.